This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Vam, welcome everyone. So we have a quite an amazing subject this evening. We have two Parshios this week, Parshios Behar and Parshios Bechukosai. And if you think about it a little bit, you'll notice it's quite a interesting shidduch, Parshios Behar and Parshios Bechukosai. It's a little bit of an incongruous combination, incongruous match over here. You know, typically when you have two Parshios together, they're somewhat repetitive, and that's why we connect them. So, for example, Tazria Mitzoira, it's the same topic, so they go together. Vayakel Pekude, they're both the Mishkan, they go together. Acher Mos Kedoshim, they're both the Parsha of Arayos, they go together. Nitzavim Vayelech, they're both the Allah Uveshvua, they go together. And here we have Behar Bechukosai. It's a little bit like like a strange match. Behar, you have some of the laws of Shemitah, you have some of the laws of selling karka, redeeming karka, selling avodim, buying houses. And then Parshas Bechukosai is the Toichacha. They don't seem to have anything to do with each other. Like, why have we joined them together? Why do they go together? I don't know, maybe make Kedoshim and Emor together. Kedoshim talks about laws of Kedusha, Emor, the laws of the Kohanim. You know, Vasepis, Behar Bechukosai, it's like, it's an odd match. Okay, so tonight we're going to be learning from three Svarim. They all have the same title. And the name of the Sefer is Emes Li'Yakov. I hear myself talking. Yeah? From the Sefer Emes Li'Yakov, the Emes Li'Yakov on Parshas Bechukosai, the Emes Li'Yakov on Divrei Hayomim primarily, and the Emes Li'Yakov on Shas, Masechta Megillah. So let's take a look. We're going to examine two psukim in the Toichacha. In Parak Chavav, Pasuk Lamed Daled, the pasuk says like this: Az tirtzeh haaretz es Shabbososeha. Then the land will be appeased for her Shabbosos. Kol Yemei Hashama, all the days of her desolation. V'atem b'eretz oyevehem, and you in the land of your enemy. Az tishbas haaretz, then the land will rest. V'hirtzas es Shabbososeha, and will be appeased for her Shabbosos. What is this referring to? Says Rashi, Az tirtzeh, Dr. Rashi, Tifayes es kas hamakoim. She'll be appeased for the anger of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Shekas al Shemitah said that the Rebbeinu Shalom was angry for the Shemitah. So in other words, when Klal Yisrael will be punished through the Toichacha, that will appease Hashem. Hashem was very angry because Klal Yisrael failed to observe the Shemitah. And when Klal Yisrael is punished with the Toichacha, it will be an appeasement for Hashem for our failure to observe Shemitah. We'll see Rabbi Kamenetsky. And then again, in Parak Chavav, Pasuk Mem Gimel, again, Nachamal, the Torah says, V'ha'aretz te'azev mehem, the land will forsake them, V'siretz es Shabbososeha, and she will be appeased for the Shemitah, Ba'shama mehem, when the land is desolate from them, V'hem yirtzu savonim, and their avera will be appeased, Yanu v'yan, b'mishpatayim also, because they failed to keep my halachas. In other words, we have two psukim that say black and white, that say openly, that the Toichacha is a punishment for failure to keep the laws of Shemitah. Well, Frekt Rabbi Kamenetsky, so in this neighborhood everybody remembers, it's still the Shloshim of Rabbi Yamin Kamenetsky, the father of our good friend Mordechai Kamenetsky, Libado ben Chaim L'chaim, and the Zayda, the great Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Bashiva of Tarvadas, has his classic work on Chumash, and he asks one obvious question: what in the world are the psukim saying that the Toichacha is for failure to keep the laws of Shemitah? Shemitah man dachar shmei. Who said a word about Shemitah? The Toichacha has got nothing to do with Shemitah. What does it have to do with Shemitah? The Toichacha is not a punishment for Shemitah. The Toichacha begins, the Parsha begins, in Bechukosai Teilechu, the most famous Rashi in Kol HaTorah Kula. Rashi says, what does it mean in Bechukosai Teilechu? If you keep the chukim, then I'm going to give you rain. Says Rashi, it can't mean Kiyom HaMitzvahs, because the very next words are V'yas Mitzvosai Tishmeru. So what does it mean that in Bechukosai Teilechu you'll have a good life? In other words, we know you have to be Mekayim the Mitzvahs. What does it mean in Bechukosai Teilechu? Says Rashi, Hamo'ani Mekayim in Bechukosai Teilechu Shetiyu Amelim B'Torah. Meaning, in Bechukosai Teilechu is telling us that you have to be Amel B'Torah. It's not enough to learn. It's not enough to come to a Shiur. It's not enough to open up a book. You got to schwitz a little bit. You got to work. You got to put in the effort. You need to be amel b'Torah. In other words, Parshas Bechukosai is saying that if you're amel b'Torah, if you work hard in learning, life will be good. And v'im loi selchu, right? V'im loi sishma'uli. In other words, the toichacha, when does the toichacha come? If a person is not amel b'Torah. Nothing to do with Shemitah. Frekt Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, here the Torah is giving you an introduction. The key to blessing and vice versa is it hinges on amelas b'Torah. So what are these psukim saying? That when the toichacha comes, Hashem will be appeased for you not keeping Shemitah. V'aretz te'azav mehem, v'siretz hashab soiseh. What's Shemitah got to do with anything? Shemitah has nothing to do with the price of tea in China. It's all about amelos b'Torah. In Bechukosai telecho, shatiyu amelim b'Torah. Rabbi Yaakov asks further, because there's a famous Rashi in this week's Parsha, and Rashi in Divrei Hayomim. By the way, there is no Rashi on Divrei Hayomim. The Perush on Divrei Hayomim is meyuchas to Rashi, but it's not Rashi. Be'ez Hashem, in the summer, we're planning a big trip. We're going to be in Rashi's Beis Medrash in Vermaiza. So if you want to have the opportunity, but Rashi did not write on Divrei Hayomim. The Perush on Divrei Hayomim is meyuchas to Rashi. Rashi makes a cheshbon that the 70 years of Galus Bavel correspond to the 70 Shemitahs that Klal Yisrael did not keep when they were in Eretz Yisrael. Rashi makes a cheshbon that we were wayward for 436 years. Okay, so now let's make a cheshbon. How many Shemitahs and Yovels are in 436 years? So it's too hard to calculate. So I'll give you a simple equation over here. How many Shemitahs are in 50 years? You have 7 Shemitahs and 1 Yovel, right? So that's 8 in 50, 16 in 100. 16 in 100, and 400 you got 16, 32, 64. Fine, so you're up to 64. Now in 36 years, how many Shemitahs are there? 5. That's 69. And then Rashi says, and the 70th one is for that extra 1 year, year 436, which has miktsas of the Shemitah cycle, and therefore Rashi says, Klal Yisrael were wayward 436 years, that's 70 Shemitahs. So says Rashi, by going to Galus Bavel for 70 years, look at number 6, Shivim Shana Shal Galus Bavel, the 70 years of Galus Bavel, Hein Hayu Keneged Shivim Shnois HaShemitah V'Yovel, corresponded to the 70 Shemitah years and Yovel years that they were machis L'fnei HaMakom in Eretz Yisrael. And comes Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, and he asks, V'zed davar she'enoi mistaber klal. It's not reasonable to say that as wayward as Klal Yisrael were, they were mevatel 69 shmitas, 70 shmitas. I mean, it's a pella. You want to say 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10, 70 in a row? It's not mistaber. It's loy ola ala das. What do Chazal mean? What does Rashi mean that we were mevatel 70 shmitas? Interesting, and the majority of today's shiur will come from the Emes Yaakov. They just came out with a new Emes Yaakov on Nevi'im and Ksuvim. So on the Emes Yaakov on Divrei Hayomim, he's marech on this inyan very much, and he poses this question in even stronger language. Look at number 10. Frekt Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky at the end of number 10. Ulechayra tamua. It's a pella. Sheklal Yisrael leishamru es hashmita roiv tekufas hayoisam Eretz Yisrael. You're telling me. By the way, does anybody know how long were Klal Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael before Churban Mayas Rishon? They were there 850 years. Okay, 440 before the Beis HaMikdash stood, and then 410 the Beis HaMikdash stood. So you're telling me for the majority of the time that Klal Yisrael were in Eretz Yisrael, they didn't keep Shemitah? It's a pella to say such a thing. Okay, so with this, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky advances really a mind-boggling thesis and a mind-boggling idea, tremendous idea, where he now shows us how Parshas Behar and Bechukosai, after this year, you're going to wonder, how could you ever learn them separately? They would seem to be an odd match. You'll see they fit together like a glove. Parshas Behar begins with the laws of Shemitah, and then Yovel. Then the next inyan is, well, if you sell your friend a field, and next year is Yovel, you're the biggest con artist in the world. Here I have a piece of land in Yerushalayim. It's worth $1 million. The only thing is that tomorrow you get it back. So you cheated him. So it talks about the dinei oina. And then it talks about redeeming karka. Then it talks about selling houses. Then it talks about selling avadim. These are all halachas affected by Shemitah and Yovel. The last pasuk in Behar, you'll say, what does that got to do with anything? It talks about Shmira Shabbos. It says, Eshab soisai tishmoiru. Well, comes the Ibn Ezra, look at number 12. The Ibn Ezra says, Shabbos over there refers to Shemitah. The entire Parshas Behar refers to Shemitah. Says Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, a davar nifla. And he gives a mashal. Let's say you have a guy, he comes home, it's been a long week, so he comes home Friday night, it's in the winter, and Mincha is 4:10. He gets home 5:10, and he tells his wife, we're skipping Shalom Aleichem Neish Chaya, we're going straight to Kiddush this week, we're going straight to the meal. He downs the gefilte fish, he downs the soup, he downs the chicken, he's in his bed at 6 o'clock, he sleeps 14 hours. Then he goes to shul, he makes sure to daven in the quickest minyan, 9 o'clock to 10:45. He doesn't say for the Chabur at the end of davening. He goes home, he eats a bissel cholent, and he's out for another 6. The guy was Shomer Shabbos, right? I mean, one thing you can't get this guy, he wasn't Mechalel Shabbos. No, he was Mechalel Shabbos. Why? Because says Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, the tachlis of resting on Shabbos is to be able to learn more. So a person uses all the time on Shabbos just to rest. Not only didn't he learn, he was Mechalel Shabbos. By the way, we have a Shiur. You have to go back to the archives. There's a famous kasha, the Ksava HaKabbalah. Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg, he asks, there's a Chazal say that if Klal Yisrael would keep 2 consecutive Shabbosos, Mashiach would come. But it's a Sira MBD. MBD said, just one Shabbat, right? And in fact, there's a medrash, just one Shabbat over here. It says, Ksava Kabbalah, Avada, all Klal Yisrael has to keep is one Shabbos. But every Shabbos has 2 chalakim. It's not doing malacha, and then there's learning. So a person, let's say, didn't do malacha and he didn't learn, he was Mechalel Shabbos. He's not Shomer Shabbos. Memela, it's one Shabbos you have to keep, but you have to keep the 2 dimensions. Well, says Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, it's the same thing with Shemitah. What do you think the purpose of Shemitah is? So you have a sabbatical, and you sit back in a hammock, and you sip lemonade, and you twiddle your thumbs for a year. The purpose of Shemitah is to learn Torah. And therefore, the purpose of Shemitah is not just to learn, it's to be Omel B'Torah. So Bechukosai begins like this. I just told you in Parshas Behar the laws of Shemitah. By the way, what's the purpose of Shemitah? In Bechukosai Telechu to be Omel B'Torah. And if you're Omel B'Torah, life will be good and dandy. If you don't listen to me, then you get the Teichacha. And if the Teichacha comes, God will be appeased for your lack of observing Shemitah. What does it mean not to observe Shemitah? No one in their right mind would actually plant and harvest and reap during Shemitah. Nobody would ever do that. And Klal Yisrael never violated Shemitah by doing avodah in Shemitah. Violating Shemitah means not going to work and not utilizing the time for Talmud Torah. Memela, when says Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, when Chazal say that Klal Yisrael violated Shemitah 70 times, it doesn't mean they went to work. When Klal Yisrael violated Shemitah 70 times, it means they didn't use the Shemitah year to be Amel B'Torah. So I happen to, I give this Shiur Wednesday morning, like a trial run, but it's a much longer version, it's like a 2-hour version. And I have a very chashuva Talmud Chacham, my Shiur, Rav Baruch Sendik, and he told over his Shiur to his son, Rav Ari, and Rav Ari lives in Eretz Yisrael, and he just emailed me before the Shiur that I should look at the Chidah in this week's Parsha. So I'm going to share with you the Chidah. What? You know him? Really? Okay. Chaim's in Israel? I don't know. You know? Okay, there you go. But, so maybe not. Maybe he's in Chicago then. Yeah? Okay. So then, Skokie? Okay, he's getting a lot of coverage tonight. Okay, so he sent me the Chidah. He said I should look in the Chidah. Chidah says like this. Beautiful Chidah. Chidah says in the Chomes Anach, he says, there's a Gemara in Brachas. The Gemara says that Rava told his Talmidim, don't look at me not in Nisan and not in Tishrei. Because during Nisan and Tishrei, the Talmidim would go and work for a month. So think about it. That means every year, the Talmidim would take off 2 months to go work. That means how much time did the Talmidim lose every year? 2 months in year 1, 2 months in year 2, year 3. At the end of 6 years, the Talmidim lost a year of learning. The purpose of Shemitah is for all the Talmidim who lost a year's worth of learning over the course of 6 years to make up time that they lost over the last 6 years. So again, this is a raya to the idea that the purpose of Shemitah is Talmud Torah. Also, he pointed out there's Rav Zalman Sorotzkin, the Znayim Torah says in Parshas Mishpatim, it says, Vayoyim HaShvi'i Tishbais, you should rest on Shabbos. The Mechilta says, Afilu B'Shvi'as. Even during Shemitah, you have to keep Shabbos. No kidding. Why would I think otherwise? The answer is, since the whole purpose of Shabbos is to learn, and the whole purpose of Shemitah is to learn, so I would think, what do you have to? You have to keep Shabbos and Shemitah also. Also Shemitah, you have to keep Shabbos. I'm learning during the 6 days. I have to learn Shabbos also during Shemitah. So it's saying, you're not exempt from Shabbos during Shemitah either. Okay, so this is the thesis of Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, and with this, we're going to be able to explain many, many inyanim in Torah. Okay, Gemara Rabbi Glatstein, please take a look at number 14. The Gemara Megillah tells us a very interesting piece of information, and that is, even though us in Chutz La'aretz, we learn a Parsha every week. And by the end of the year, Simchas Torah comes, we finish Kala Torah Kula, Chazak, V'nis Chazek, we have a Simchas Torah. Yeah? Says the Gemara Megillah, in Eretz Yisrael, they didn't do things like that. Says the Gemara, Levnei Ma'arava, Demaski, L'da'iraisa, Betlas Shinin. In Eretz Yisrael, they finished the Torah in 3 years. I'm sure there were many more people who were able to be Maver Sedra in Eretz Yisrael. I mean, it's like you have a third of the job. You could probably do it with Rashi and with all the Mefarshim. Probably a Mechaya living in Eretz Yisrael in a 3-year cycle. Probably more people came to Shul, right? The laning was a third as long. I mean, in jail, life was easier, right? In Eretz Yisrael, the cycle was a 3-year cycle. So let's think about this. Why? Why in Eretz Yisrael was there a 3-year cycle? I thought in Eretz Yisrael they're supposed to be on a higher madriga. Why would they have a 3-year cycle? Satan's. When did it stop? Why doesn't the Gemara ever tell us? Oh, they did a 3-year cycle and it stopped this and this time. We have no information about when this 3-year cycle stopped. Says Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Dvarim Neflam, this is what he says in Devrei Hayamim. Back in the day, what did Jews do for a living? They weren't doctors, they weren't lawyers, they weren't accountants, they weren't plumbers, they weren't electricians. What did they do? Agricultural society. Viharaya, the Torah says, say in Shema. V'haya in Shamaya Tishma. Hashem says, if you listen to the Torah, guess what I'm going to give you? Rain. Grace Gedil. Try to, motivate your kids. By the way, if you do your homework, Hashem's going to make it rain. Well, most people don't want it to rain. It's right in the Torah, rain is a reward. Or in the Torah, we say, Bechukosai telechu, v'nasati geshmecha mitam. Apparently, it's obvious that back in the day, Jewish people were farmers. Fine. Says the Chassam Sofer, he quotes his Rebbe the Hafla, based on the Hafla. Hopefully, we'll be by the Hafla's kever also. And the Chassam Sofer says an amazing thing. We know the Gemara Brachos on the Hafla Hey, there's a machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rosh Bar Rabbi Shmuel says, work for a living. Hanig b'hem minig derech eretz. And Rosh Bar says, work, what are you nuts? Efshar adam zareya b'shas zriya, choresh b'shas charisha, kaitzer b'shas ktsira, Torah ma tehei aleha. So you have this machlokes, Rabbi Shmuel says, work, and Rabbi Shimon says, don't do it. Says the Heilige Chassam Sofer, they don't argue. It depends where you live. Listen to this. We're going to be laning Sefer Rus, Megillas Rus on Shavuos. Who was the Gadol Hadar during the story of Rus? Boaz. Yeah? Now I have a kasha for you. Where is Boaz? Right? He's the main character. Where is he during the story? He's in the Gairan. He's in the threshing floor. What's he doing in the threshing floor? He should be in the Beis HaMedrash. Imagine if, where's Rav Moshe? Well, he's not in Yeshiva. Where is he? He's in the fields in Pennsylvania. He's milking the cow. What in the world is Boaz doing in the field? Says the Heilige Chassam Sofer. Would you have a kasha if people wanted to know where is Boaz and they said he's putting on his tefillin? Would you have a kasha? People ask, where's Bayaz? He was sitting in the sukkah. If you live in Eretz Yisrael, there's a mitzvah saseh dairaisa to work the land. Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah dairaisa. It's a chiyuv. What could you do? You can't learn. You got to work the land. Says Chassam Sofer, it could be that even if you're an accountant, or even if you have any other profession, and you're advancing the society of Eretz Yisrael, you're mekayim a mitzvah dairaisa of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Memela in Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yishmael says, work, 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 work. It's a dairaisa, you got to work. Yishuv haaretz. Rav Shem Bar Yochai was talking about in Chutz La'aretz. In Chutz La'aretz, you're going to work. Where are you going to work? In Oklahoma, to make the amber fields more profitable for the United States of America. It's a nice thing, but it's not a mitzvah dairaisa. What are you going to do? You're advancing society. It depends where you live. In Eretz Yisrael, working the land, advancing the society is a mitzvah dairaisa. Mamela says, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, a davar nifla. In Eretz Yisrael, they didn't have so much time to learn. Mamela, they couldn't lane the Parshios every year. They couldn't even lane it in a 2-year cycle. They had to minimize the limud Torah as much as possible and to do it in a 3-year cycle in order to maximize the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. That's the reason for the 3-year cycle in Eretz Yisrael, says Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. They weren't working on Shabbos, but Lamaisa, says Rabbi Yaakov, listen carefully. The purpose of Kriyas HaTorah, people think, what's the purpose of Kriyas HaTorah? I don't know, Balkari needs he needs to make a living also. So he comes to Shul, he does his thing. We sit aside, we sit at Behar. It's some ritual. No. Says Rabbi Yaakov, Kriyas HaTorah is the limud HaTorah of Klal Yisrael for the week. The entire learning of a Jew revolves around the Kriyas HaTorah of Shabbos. The preparing the parsha. By the way, the Aruch HaShulchan says, the Lavush says that the reason for Maver Sedra, why does Hashem want us to read the parsha twice in Unklis? Hashem wants us to be Baki in the Torah. In other words, part of our weekly learning is revolves around Kriyas HaTorah. Therefore, in Eretz Yisrael, where they did not have the same amount of time to learn, because they were involved in working the land, therefore they had a 3-year cycle in Eretz Yisrael. Lefizeh, in a footnote in the Emes Yaakov, he says, there's a big kasha. We put Vayakel Pekudei together. Vayakel Pekudei together, it's monstrous, so long. Why would we put Vayakel Pekudei together? We should put, Yisroi Mishpatim together. Yisroi is much shorter. Mishpatim is a little bit shorter. Why put together Vayakel Pekudei? Vayakel Pekudei is much, much longer. Why are we making it so much longer for people? The answer is, the purpose of Kriyas HaTorah is not to hear the words. The purpose is the learning of it then and during the week. Vayakel Pekudei is a very convenient and easy chazara of Truma Tetzaveh. But Yisroi Mishpatim are so malei v'gadosh of so many mitzvahs, then it would be too burdensome. In other words, if Kriyas HaTorah was just reading the psukim, then Ein Echanami would be much easier to lane Yisroi Mishpatim than to lane Vayakel Pekudei. But if the purpose of it is learning it, then it's much more reasonable to double up on Vayakel Pekudei. Okay. So there was a 3-year cycle. Why a 3-year cycle? Where does that come from? I understand they couldn't do it in 1 year. But why not 5 years? Why not 6 years? Why not 4? What's the inyan of 3 years? So says Rabbi Yaakov very beautifully that the Kriyas HaTorah cycle was very intertwined with their working of the land. And the working of the land was dependent on Trumas HaMaasros. So we know there's a maaser cycle. Year 1 is Maaser Rishon, Maaser Sheni. Year 2 is Maaser Rishon, Maaser Sheni. Year 3 is Maaser Rishon, Maaser Ani. That is then a cycle of Maaser. In fact, there's a Gemara Bava Metzia, and it's quoted in a footnote as well, in number 20. The Gemara Bava Metzia says, and not Pechas, why were the stores of Beis Hino destroyed 3 years before Yerushalayim? So the Gemara says, because they were very makel on the laws of Maaser. And the Ion Yaakov explains, because they were makel on the laws of Maaser, and Maaser is a 3-year cycle, so they were destroyed a Maaser cycle early before the rest of Yerushalayim. So we see from here that there were Maaser cycles. A cycle is 3 years. Maaser Rishon, Maaser Sheni, Maaser Rishon, Maaser Sheni, Maaser Rishon, Maaser Ani. And by the way, after year 3, what mitzvah came after year 3? The mitzvah of Biur, where if a person had to declare that he fulfilled all of his maaser responsibilities in the past 3 years. So since there was a maaser cycle, an agricultural cycle of 3 years, the Kriyas HaTorah cycle was a 3-year cycle. Okay. So says Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. So 1 second. According to this, and we're taking the Gemara literally, because the Gemara says they lane the Torah every 3 years. That means year 1 to 3, they lane the Torah. Year 4 to 6, they lane the Torah. What do you think they did in year 7? Says Rabbi Yaakov, there is no doubt that in year 7 in Eretz Yisrael, they reverted back to a 1-year cycle like they did in Bavel. That's a Chiddush Nifla. And we're going to see, Kamat, nobody agrees to that. But says Rabbi Yaakov, when the Gemara says they had a 3-year cycle, it doesn't mean 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, no, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. It was 3, 3, 1, 3, 3, 1. Why? Because since the whole purpose of Shemitah is to learn, so they had an entire year. In other words, the only reason they went to the 3-year cycle was because they couldn't keep up, because they were involved in Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Comes the Shemitah year, they weren't involved in Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Memela, they reverted back to the 1-year cycle of the Bnei Bavel. Lefizeh comes out an amazing thing. Rav Yaakov Emden, who we're going to be by his cover also, the Ezras Hashem, and the Maretz Chios, in Masechta Megillah, they both asked the following question. The Gemara in Megillah says in Aflam and Alpha and Beis, there was a man by the name of Ezra, and Ezra made a takana that we have to lane the Toichacha twice a year at 2 intervals. What are the 2 intervals? You have to lane Bechukosai before Shavuos, and you have to lane Kisavai before Rosh Hashanah. Says the Gemara, why? Kedei shetichla shana v'kelesa. As the year is ending, so too let the curses go down the drain with the year going down the drain. By the way, that makes sense to lane the Toichacha before Rosh Hashanah. Why would we lane the Toichacha before Shavuos? So the Gemara says, Shavuos is also the end of the year because on Shavuos we're judged on fruits. I mean, if you would ask me, I wouldn't have thought that Shavuos is a major Rosh Hashanah. You wouldn't have thought that Shavuos is a major Rosh Hashanah. L'maisa, the Shlach HaKadosh says, we see from this Gemara that Shavuos is a very critical beginning of the year. When it says Peros Ilan refers to Torah. So in other words, Shavuos is the Rosh Hashanah for how much Torah a person will achieve during the year. That's what the Gemara means, that we have to lane the Toichacha before Shavuos, Kedei shetichla shana v'keloisa. So Rabbi Yaakov Emden asks, and the Maretz Chios asks, if you need to lane the Toichacha before Shavuos and before Rosh Hashanah, so what in the world do they do in Eretz Yisrael with the 3-year cycle? Bishlama and Chutz La'aretz. So the Parshios are like clockwork. Bechukosai is before Shavuos, and Kisavai is for Rosh Hashanah. But in Eretz Yisrael that there's a 3-year cycle, so what in the world did they do? How did they fulfill the takana of Ezra? Now if you learn it was a 3-year cycle, 3 years, 3 years, 3 years, 3 years, it's taka davar pella. But says the footnote on the Emes Yaakov, on Divrei Hayomim, according to Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, you know how they fulfilled the takana of Ezra? During Shemitah. In the Shemitah year, they went back to the 1-year cycle. In the Shemitah year, they taka lane Bechukosai before Shavuos, and they lane Kisavai before Rosh Hashanah. So they were able to mekayim the takana of Ezra during the 7th year, during the Shemitah year. In other words, in Eretz Yisrael, they were only oiker the 1-year cycle because they were busy working. But they were only busy working years 1 through 6. In year 7, they were just like the Bnei Chutz La'aretz, and they laned the 1-year cycle, and they were able to fulfill the takana of Ezra. Ezra tikein lahem liYisrael. How often? Doesn't say. Doesn't say how often. So listen to this. So everybody wants to know. Now this is from Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky on Masechta Megillah. Look at number 21. Says Rabbi Yaakov, everybody wants to know. Here we have this beautiful minhag in Eretz Yisrael to lane the Parshios once every 3 years. And says Rabbi Yaakov, Mihu sha'akrei lagamrei. Who uprooted the minhag in Eretz Yisrael? Kimei oilam lo shamanu shenimtza yishuv hanoyeg minhag zeh. We never heard that anybody stopped the minhag. When did the minhag stop? When did the custom stop in Eretz Yisrael to lane the Parshios every 3 years? Yeah? Rabbi, have a seat. When did this custom stop? The answer is, says Rabbi Yaakov, the cycle of laning it every 3 years was dependent on maaser. So long as maaser existed, maaser rishon, maaser sheni, maaser rishon, maaser sheni, maaser rishon, maaser ani, mamela, they laned the parshios every 3 years. But as soon as the laws of maaser ceased, so mamela, they went back to the 1 year cycle like the bnei chutz la'aretz. There's no need for anybody to report when and why the 3 year cycle stopped. The 3 year cycle is completely and utterly dependent on the cycle of maaser. It was an agricultural cycle. The only reason they didn't lane the Torah every year is because they were busy being mekayim in the mitzvah d'oraisa of Yishuv Haaretz. As soon as Shemitah came, they laned it every year. They laned it in 1 year. As soon as maaser was nisbatel, they laned the Torah in a 1 year cycle. It's very interesting, Rabbi Sai, that the Achronim do not seem to accept this concept, this idea, that the 3 year cycle did not exist for Shemitah. In other words, Rabbi Yaakov's Chiddush, it was a cycle of 3 years in accordance with the Maasros. 3 years, 1 year. 3 years, 1 year. It's very interesting. If you look in the Yam Shel Shloimeh, look at number 26. The Yam Shel Shloimeh in Masechta Gittin. At the end of the Masechta, he has something called Chiluke Dinim Bein Bnei Eretz Yisrael L'Bnei Bavel. You have the Yam Shloimeh writes the differences in custom between the Bnei Eretz Yisrael and the Bnei Bavel. So he writes like this: that in Chutz La'aretz they would make Simchas Torah every year. And in Eretz Yisrael, he writes, they would do it every 3.5 years. So it's not like Rabbi Yaakov, right? Rabbi Yaakov is learning, it's 3, 3, 1. Here, the Yam Shloimeh is clearly saying, they lane the whole Torah twice in Shemitah. 3.5, 3.5. Or, it's very interesting, there's a Masechta Seifrim. In the back of Masechta Avodah Zarah, you have Masechtos Katanos. You have something called Masechta Seifrim. So you have a Bryce over here. Look at number 27. The Bryce says like this: that Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, I never looked inside a Sefer of Agadata. One time I looked in a Sefer Agadata and I found that the Sefer of Agadata said there are 175 Parshios in the Torah keneged the years of the lifetime of Avraham Avinu. So the Nachas Yaakov, who's one of the Mefarshim on the Masechta Seifrim, he asks, what in the world, 175 Parshios? You know, by the way, how many Parshios are there in Chumash? 54, right? Are there? So the Zohar says, Yesh Gan Parshios, there are 53. L'maisa, Israel's right, because if you count them, l'chayra, they're 54. So there's a lot of Torah on this. The Chida in the Shem HaGdolim brings down from Rav Moshe Zakuto. Rav Moshe Zakuto says, you don't count V'zois HaBracha, you don't lean it on Shabbos, you lean it on Simchas Torah. There are other terutzim to this question also. But one thing is for sure, is there are not 175 Parshios in the Torah. Now I don't care what shul you daven in, there are not 100. So what does the Masechta Sefer mean 175? So says the Nachlas Yaakov, that if in Eretz Yisrael they had a 3 year cycle, but look in the Yam Shel Shloimeh. Now if it's really a 3 year cycle, that means how many Parshios are in the Torah? 150 or 162. But if you take the Yam Shel Shloimeh, that it wasn't a 3 year cycle, it was a 3.5 year cycle. So that's 50 in year 1, another 50 in year 2, another 50 in year 3, and then another half a year. Head on, it's 175 Parshios. He says that's shot in the Masechta Seifrim, that the 3-year cycle was not exactly 3 years, it was 3.5 years, hence 175 Parshios. Now again, this is not like Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. Rabbi Yaakov learns it's a 3-year cycle, and the Gemara is literally the Maila, the Adifos of Rabbi Yaakov's Pshat is the Gemara is very literal. The Gemara says if the Gemara meant the 3.5-year cycle, it would have said a 3.5-year cycle. It says a 3-year cycle. So he learns 3 years, and then in the Shemitah year they learned the whole Parsha, the whole Torah. So Ma'ariv Rabbi Sai, it comes out Ma'amish Adavar Nifla. Listen to this. Does anybody know what mitzvah was done either during the Shemitah year or at the end of the Shemitah year? At the Beis HaMikdash, on Sukkot, the Melech would lane from the Sefer Torah. What would he lane? Sefer Devarim, Mishnah Torah. When did he lane it? On Sukkot. Hakhel, the mitzvah of Hakhel. Now, what does the pasuk say about the mitzvah of Hakhel? Look at number 30. Vayitzav Moshe oisam lemar, miketz sheva shanim. At the end of 7 years, b'moyed shnas hashmita, during Shemitah, b'chag hasukos. This is a very difficult pasuk. Why is it a difficult pasuk? Because it says at the end of 7 years. Rabbi Sai, if it's at the end of the year, that means it must be Sukkot is after the year's over. Yeah? That means what year is it? The 8th year. So then it's not Shemitah anymore. Just how do you read this pasuk? Look carefully. Miketz sheva shanim b'moyed shnas hashmita. At the end of 7 years of Shemitah, b'chag hasukos. If miketz means end, that means it's the Sukkot after the calendar year. It's the 8th year. How could you call it Shemitah? So the Ibn Ezra says the word miketz means the beginning. Miketz means, so Rabbi Yaakov explains, the word miketz just means the end of. Every entity has two ends, the beginning and the end. So the Ibn Ezra is forced to say miketz is the beginning, because otherwise Sukkot will not be in the 7th year. Otherwise it will be in the 8th year. And the Ibn Ezra L'Shita teaches that when the Torah says miketz sheva shanim tasa shmita, v'zed dvar hashmita shamoy kobal mashe yadai, that you have to cancel a debt. When is a debt canceled? Says Ibn Ezra, miketz sheva shanim, the beginning of the 7th year. The Ibn Ezra says Shemitah is meshamed at the beginning of the year. Hakhel is the beginning of the 7th year, and Shemitah is meshamed at the beginning of the 7th year. And the Ramban disagrees on both accounts. Says the Ramban, the word miketz in Kol HaTorah Kula means the end, right? Vayhi miketz shnasayim yamim uparoi choylem. Miketz means the end. And that's why it says Ramban, Shvius eina mishametas ela b'soif. Shvius only cancels the debt at the end of the year. Says the Ramban. And what does the pasuk mean? Look back at number 30. Vayitzav Moshe oisam lemar. Moshe commanded them, miketz sheva shanim, at the end of 7 years, on Sukkos of Shemitah. It's not Sukkos of Shemitah, it's Sukkos of the 8th year. So how's the Ramban going to read the pasuk? If miketz means the end, that means it's after the calendar year, then it's not Shemitah. Says Rabbi Yaakov, listen carefully. Everybody knows throughout the Torah, whether it's Parshas Re'eh, whether it's Parshas Pinchas, whether it's Parshas Emor, whenever we talk about the Shalosh Regalim, what are the Shalosh Regalim? What's the order of them? Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos. So let's say this year. What year is this year? Tafshin, Ayin, Zayin, yeah? Let's talk about what are the 3 regalim of this year? Pesach, Shavuos, and next Sukkos. Sukkos, Tafshin, Ayin, Ches, is the 3rd regel of Tafshin, Ayin, Zayin. Meaning, there's a package of 3 Yomim Tovim. Sukkos may be in the calendar year Tafshin, Ayin, Ches, but it belongs to the package of Shalosh regalim of the Tafshin, Ayin, Zayin. Memela, says Rabbi Yaakov, when the pasuk says, according to Ramban, miketz sheva shanim, at the end of 7 years, b'moyed on Yom Tif, shnas hashmita, of Shemitah, b'chag hasukos, that is the Sukkos that belongs to Shemitah. The Sukkos that actually falls out during Shemitah belong to the previous year. Yeah? So listen carefully. What did Klal Yisrael do during Shemitah? The first 3 years, they didn't have so much time to learn. They could only learn the Torah once. The next 3 years, they didn't have so much time to learn. They could only learn the Torah once. Their entire 6 years, they're looking forward. When am I going to be able to stop working already and have a sabbatical and learn the Torah and sit down like the Bnei Chutz La'aretz? So what did they do during Shemitah? What they did every Shabbos, they devoted the year to Talmud Torah. Mamela, if you spend so much time learning, what must you do before you stop? You need to review. Mamela, listen carefully. When did Shemitah end? So imagine you're a farmer, and you're working 6 years, and you took off the 7th year. When are you going to start working? Rosh Hashanah, you're going to work? You ain't working. If you don't say Hakhel on Rosh Hashanah, because Sifrei Chaim, Maaser, Psuchim, you're not going to work on Rosh Hashanah. You're going back to work Asar Simei Tshuva? Says Rav Yaakov, you ever see what the Shari Tshuva says about how a person should be so focused on the Yemei Hadin? How could you bring yourself to work during Asar Simei Tshuva? You think they went back to work Asar Simei Tshuva? So when did they go back to work? You think they went back to work between Yom Kippur and Sukkot? If Sukkot is Rishon L'cheshvan Avonos, because people don't have time to sin because they're buying Daled Minim and they're sitting in building the Sukkah, you think they went back to work between Asar Simei Tshuva and Sukkot? That means when was the last day of their sabbatical? Sukkot! Mamela, as the climax, as the pinnacle of that year that was dedicated to Talmud Torah, the year that they learned the Torah in 1 year. The climax of that was the mitzvah of Hakhel, where everyone would come to the Beis HaMikdash, and the king, Bechukosai would get up and review Devarim in front of an entire Klal Yisrael as a Chazara, as a Mishnah Torah, after such a wondrous year of Talmud Torah. After all, that's the purpose of Shemitah. Says Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, now we understand the flow and the shidduch of Parshas Behar and Parshas Bechukosai. Parshas Behar were given the mitzvah of Shemitah. Parshas Bechukosai were given the purpose of Shemitah. The purpose of Shemitah is Shatiu Amelam HaTorah. And if we're Bechukosai Telechu, if not only we keep the not working on Shemitah, but we utilize the time of Shemitah, then Menasati Gishmechem Be'itam. However, V'yim Lo Sishma'u Li, if a person does not utilize Shemitah, not that he goes to work, nobody's doing that, but if they don't utilize that leisure time for Amelos B'Torah, then the Teichacha Chas V'Shalom, and that's why in the Teichacha it makes a reference to Shemitah. Oz Tirtze Ha'aretz Hashab Soiseha V'Aretz Tiaz Mehem. We asked, Shemitah Man Dachar Shmei, the Teichacha is for failure for Amelos B'Torah. The answer is Hainu Hach, it's the same thing. The purpose of Shemitah is Shatiu Amelim B'Torah. And the 70 Shemitahs that Klal Yisrael failed to observe doesn't mean they planted, they harvested, they reaped. What it means is they did not utilize the time for its intended purpose. This helps us understand the function of Hakhel. This helps us understand why they had a 3-year cycle, why they didn't have a 1-year cycle. This helps us understand how it was attached to the maaser cycle, and in fact, why during the year of Shemitah it reverted back to the 1-year cycle. So it gives us quite a broad overview of the understanding of Shemitah and many other inyanim. Rabbi Glatstein, thank you so much for coming. Bracha v'hatzlacha. Shkayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.